There's a quote from Nietzsche that I think very few people truly internalize until they've been painfully deceived at least once in their lives. People are more inclined to believe what they want to believe than what is true. I once witnessed a young woman frantically rummaging through her purse for her card, rushing to pay for a bag discounted 70%, a bag she wouldn't have even glanced at twice if it didn't have the glaring red text, "Only 2 left," right next to it. I sat there, not judging her in the slightest, because even I, someone who has spent decades studying human psychology, still occasionally get brazenly fooled by my own brain. The truth that few want to admit is this: your brain, my brain, all of our brains have vulnerabilities so large they're frightening. These are weaknesses that, no matter how intelligent you are, how wealthy or how successful, can still be exploited with surprising ease. Today, I'm not going to stand here and teach you how to become a perfectly flawless human being, but I will show you something far more important. If you know exactly where you're weak, if you can recognize when primitive instincts are overriding reason, then you'll become much harder to control, much harder to manipulate than most other people. But before we begin, I want you to understand that this is not your fault, nor is it because you're weak or lacking in wisdom. The human brain was designed, evolved over millions of years to serve one single purpose: survival in a dangerous, primitive environment, where one wrong decision could turn you into dinner for a hunting tiger, get you abandoned by your tribe in the wilderness, or leave you starving to death in the bone-chilling cold of winter. In such harsh survival contexts, our ancestors' brains learned an invaluable skill: making decisions quickly, almost instantaneously, because in that world, delay meant death. These mental shortcuts that psychology calls cognitive biases. But the problem is, we no longer live in caves. We no longer have to flee from wild beasts or worry about food for tomorrow. Instead, we live in a world flooded with meticulously designed advertising, algorithms that understand you better than you understand yourself, and countless individuals extremely sophisticated at exploiting the primitive instincts remaining in your brain, just to sell you things you don't need at all, or to make you believe things completely divorced from truth. And the first vulnerability I want to tell you about, also the one I see most commonly in daily life, is the need for acceptance. That primal desire to blend in with the crowd, to avoid becoming the isolated one. I have a friend named Sam, a very intelligent man with sharp, distinctive views on most things. But once, at a gathering of friends, I witnessed him sitting silent throughout a long debate, even though I knew full well he had an opinion completely opposite to what the whole group was agreeing upon. Not because he had nothing to say, nor because he lacked confidence or feared being contradicted. Later, when I asked him privately, Sam sighed and told me, "I knew they were wrong, I had all the reasoning to argue, but I didn't want to make the whole group uncomfortable and turn myself into the party pooper that evening." That is exactly the manifestation of the psychological vulnerability that researchers call conformity, the tendency to follow the crowd to fit in. And if you think you're not like that, then perhaps you're deceiving yourself more than you think. In the 1950s, the renowned psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that became a classic in the history of psychology. He had a group of people look at 3 clearly drawn straight lines on a board and ask them to point out which was the longest. The answer was obvious. Even a child could see it was line B. But the interesting thing happened when the people around them, all actors hired beforehand, began deliberately choosing incorrectly. And the result shocked the entire academic community. 75% of the actual participants chose wrong along with the crowd, even though their eyes could still clearly see which was the right answer. They weren't blind, they weren't stupid, they simply feared being different, feared standing alone against the whole group. You still think you're not like that? Then try looking back at your own life for a moment. Have you ever clicked like on a social media post not because you actually liked it, but just because you saw hundreds of others had already liked it? Have you ever bought something you weren't even sure you needed just because everyone is using this? And marketers, persuasion experts, they understand this vulnerability down to the smallest detail. That's why you constantly hear phrases like, "Over 1 million people trust this," "the #1 selling product on the market," or "Don't let yourself get left behind in this race." They're not selling you a product at all. They're selling you the feeling of belonging, the feeling of safety when you're part of the crowd. Carl Jung once wrote about the concept of the collective shadow, meaning that humans have a natural tendency to dissolve the individual self into the crowd to avoid having to face themselves, their own true thoughts and feelings. And in the social media era today, where your value seems to be measured by the number of likes, the number of followers, this vulnerability not only exists, but is amplified 1,000 times, 10,000 times. You're not weak or blameworthy for wanting to be accepted, for wanting to belong somewhere. That's simply you being a normal human being with survival instincts etched deep in your genes. But if you don't learn to recognize when your brain is prioritizing fitting in over truth, when you're trading away your own beliefs just to avoid standing alone, then you'll live your entire life according to a script others have written for you, rather than what you truly believe.
The next one is more subtle because it strikes at our very ego, at our pride in our ability to control our own lives. I once met a man in a bar on a Friday night who told me he played the lottery every week like clockwork. When I asked why he persisted despite knowing the odds of winning were terrifyingly low, he laughed and said, "I have a feeling this week I'll win. You know, something inside me signals it." I nodded and asked further, "What specifically is that feeling based on?" He took a sip of beer, then replied, "I'm a man. Sometimes you have to trust your intuition. You can't explain everything." This is the manifestation of illusion of control, the illusion of being in control, one of the most powerful and dangerous biases the human brain creates. The truth is, our brains absolutely hate uncertainty. Hate the feeling of not knowing what will happen next, hate it so much that they're willing to create a completely false sense of control, even though, in reality, you're not controlling anything at all. There's a classic experiment in psychology that I love to mention. Researchers divided participants into 2 groups to play the lottery. The first group was allowed to choose whatever numbers they wanted, while the second group was randomly given tickets with predetermined numbers. Then, researchers came around and asked if anyone wanted to exchange their tickets, offering to pay money for doing so. The result was truly astonishing. Those in Group 1, those who had chosen their own numbers, almost completely refused to trade their tickets. The reason they gave was they felt, "The numbers I chose have a higher chance. I trust my own choice." But the cold mathematical truth is, the probability of winning for both groups was exactly identical, not differing even by 1,000th. The philosopher Schopenhauer once said, "Man is driven by a blind will." What he meant wasn't that we're stupid, but that we often mistakenly believe we're actively making decisions when in reality we're just reacting according to deep instincts and the illusions our brains create to comfort ourselves. In the field of investing, I've seen countless people lose money, lose entire fortunes just because they trusted too much in their own feeling that the market would rise, in their personal analysis of some stock. Daniel Kahneman, the behavioral psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics, spent his entire life proving one thing. Humans have 2 thinking systems operating in parallel. System 1 is fast thinking, automatic, full of emotion and bias. System 2 is slow thinking, careful, far more rational. The biggest problem is that System 1 always dominates in most of our decisions, and it's precisely this system that gives birth to countless illusions about control.
And now we come to a vulnerability that, in my view, is tearing modern society into fragments that cannot be reconnected. I remember once watching football with 2 friends. One, a die-hard fan of Team A, the other passionately supporting Team B. The match was tense, with many controversial situations, and the referee made several rather puzzling decisions. When the final whistle blew, both my friends simultaneously jumped up and shouted almost at the same moment, "The referee was so biased!" But the funny thing, or rather the thought-provoking thing, is they were talking about the same referee, the same match, yet drawing two completely opposite conclusions about which team he favored. This is the clearest manifestation of confirmation bias, and the rather brutal truth you need to face is our brains are not at all designed to seek objective truth. They're designed to seek evidence confirming the beliefs they already have. If you already have a prejudice that someone is bad, then your brain will automatically remember all the times they did bad things and inadvertently overlook or minimize all the times they did good things. If you're madly in love with someone, then you'll automatically filter out all the red warning signs, even though they're appearing right before your eyes quite clearly. If you believe in a certain political viewpoint, then you'll only read articles, only watch videos, only listen to people supporting that viewpoint, while automatically dismissing all opposing opinions as if they don't exist. Nietzsche once made a controversial statement: "There are no facts, only interpretations." Many people misunderstand this in a nihilistic direction, thinking he's saying nothing is real. But actually, what he wanted to remind us is what you call truth in everyday life is often just how you perceive the world through the lens, through the filter of your own beliefs, experiences, and desires. And in the era we're living in, this bias not only exists, but amplified to a degree previous generations never experienced. The algorithms of Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, every social media platform you use daily, all are programmed with one single goal: to show you what you want to see so you spend more time on that platform. You watch a conspiracy theory video, the system will immediately suggest 10 similar videos, each one further reinforcing that belief. The result is you no longer live in the real world. You're living in a filter bubble designed specifically for you, a virtual world where everything you see confirms what you already believe, and anything that contradicts your beliefs is systematically eliminated. Manipulators, those who want to control the thoughts of the masses, they understand this better than anyone. Fake news spreads many times faster than truth. Not because people are stupid, but because fake news is often designed to exploit confirmation bias. It tells you what you want to hear. It makes you feel right, feel smart, feel like you're on the side of truth. And that feeling is too sweet, too attractive for the brain to refuse. And finally, the fourth vulnerability I want to share with you is perhaps the most exploited in marketing, in sales, and in all forms of persuasion. That is the fear of scarcity combined with the fear of loss. I still clearly remember the scene of a young woman sitting in a coffee shop, eyes glued to her phone screen, fingers scrolling back and forth on an online course website. Inside her head was a fierce struggle. $300 was not a small amount, and she wasn't sure she really needed that course. But then she saw the flashing red text, "Only 3 spots left. After midnight tonight, the price will double." And in just a few minutes, I saw her pull out her card and pay. Not because she actually wanted to learn, but because she was afraid of missing the opportunity, afraid of having to pay double tomorrow, afraid those last 3 spots would be gone immediately. This is the deadly combination of two psychological effects: scarcity effect and loss aversion. And two great behavioral psychologists, Kahneman and Tversky, spent their entire lives researching and proving something that sounds simple but has profound impact. People fear losing more than twice as much as they enjoy gaining. To help you visualize better, if I gave you $150 right now, you'd feel happy, feel fortunate. But if I took $50 from you, then the pain, the discomfort you'd feel would be twice as strong as the joy of receiving money, even though it's the same amount. Our brains are programmed to be far more sensitive to loss than to gain, because in the primitive survival environment, losing a food source could mean death, while having extra food was just a small advantage. All skilled salespeople, professional marketers, they know this like the back of their hand. That's why you constantly see phrases like, "Only 2 rooms left," even though the hotel actually has dozens of rooms. "Sale ends in 3 hours," even though that sale is repeated every week. "Limited edition, never reproduced," even though the product is mass-produced in factories. all are direct hits on the fear of loss, on the fear of missing out that your brain carries from primitive times. Robert Cialdini, known as the father of the psychology of persuasion, once wrote a sentence that I think sums it all up in his classic book, Influence. People don't act because they want to have something good. They act because they're afraid of not having it. But what's even worse, what few people realize, is this vulnerability doesn't just make you buy things you don't need, spend money on meaningless things. It also makes you hold tight to things you should have let go of long ago. How many people are staying in a relationship that's clearly toxic, causing suffering, just because they're afraid if they leave, they'll have to face loneliness? How many people are doing a job they bitterly hate every day just because they're afraid if they quit, they'll lose stability, even though that stability is slowly killing their passion and vitality? How many people don't dare to change, don't dare step out of their comfort zone just because they're afraid of losing what they have, even though what they have doesn't make them happy at all? Your brain is programmed to hold on, to protect what you already have, not to let go or change. And in this volatile modern world, sometimes that very tendency becomes the biggest trap keeping you stuck in a life that isn't yours.
In the end, I'm not telling you about these 4 weaknesses to make you anxious, or to make you think you're a puppet being controlled. I'm telling you so you know, freedom isn't about having no weaknesses. Freedom is knowing where you're weak. You can't eliminate these vulnerabilities. They're etched deep in the brain through millions of years of evolution. But you can learn to recognize when your brain is being exploited. Every time you're about to make a decision, whether big or small, ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I'm afraid of being isolated? Am I creating an illusion of control? Am I only seeking evidence to confirm old beliefs? Who benefits when I feel scarcity and fear loss? These questions don't give you the right answers, but they make you pause, and in that moment of pause, you regain control. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." What he meant is, you can't control instinct, but you can control your response to it. If this video makes you see something, however small, about yourself, please share it, because maybe someone on your friends list is also being fooled by their own brain without knowing it. See you in the next video, where interesting and mysterious things about dark psychology await you.